Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. Send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. Travel season is upon us, and I've booked my flights for an upcoming conference.
Oh, buddy. Which conference? What are you coming to?
I'm heading out to Self.
Oh, the small and yet the wonderful. I am super excited for Self. A number of things coming up this year at Self. So the first is we're still ironing out the details of a meetup, but we would like to do that. We're kind of thinking Friday night, but I'd be interested to hear from people what works from you, what doesn't. I'm still gathering account from our team, and then we're going to try to work with what Southeast Linux Fest does each year because they have events going on, and I'd like to try to conflict with those as little as possible. So let me know what works. We're also thinking of doing a first this year. We're looking at ways that we can participate and hang out in family-friendly, non-alcoholic ways, and as part of that, Steve and I are going to do an Ask Me Anything session. So whether or not you're going to be at Southeast Linux Fest, you can join via the stream. We'll have details published ahead of time, but you can start sending in those questions basically whenever you want, and you can tag it for Southeast Linux Fest, and then that night we'll answer a bunch of questions. We'll also be doing Ask Noah live from Self. In the past, we've done a War Stories episode, and I think that would be a really great way coming into 2024, as one of my talks is one gigantic big war story. Steve, you're giving a couple of talks this year. I think one on OpenShift, right?
Yeah, I'm giving a talk on OpenShift Virt, and so this is basically running virtual machines with Kubernetes, and so that'll be of interest to anybody who is struggling with the Broadcom takeover of VMware, because a bunch of stuff like on a personal level, they got rid of the free tier for ESXi, even though they've been trying to walk that back, and so there's a bunch of people who are running VMware kind of quasi open source stuff at home for free or in home labs or in labs all over the place, and they're kind of looking for a new home. So that might be of interest for some people.
Absolutely. And I assume that your new home will be all open sourcery thingies that everybody can get access.
Yeah. So while I am going to be representing Red Hat and talking about OpenShift, I also will explain what the underpinnings are if you're running vanilla Kubernetes of some flavor and how you might go ahead and stitch that together yourself.
I love it. I can't wait. I'll be there. I'll be listening. I want to learn about OpenShift. Also, I'm going to be watching JT. Producer JT every year does a retro install. So he takes some of the oldest technology known to man, and well, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it is pretty old, like 10, 20 years. And he tries to install Linux on it. And as you might imagine, it isn't quite as simple as plug the flash the drive with the ISO and boot off of it and wait. There's a few more steps involved. And often it involves kind of jiggering some hardware. So he'll be doing that, and we'll probably stream that as well. I hope you can join us. If you can, head over to southeastlinuxfest.org. Sign up is June 7th, 8th, and 9th. Steve, should we do some feedback?
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in from JM. JM writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. Do you know any device to bridge a landline over wireless? I need to connect a landline from my house to a shipping container 400 feet away, and cable is not practical. I'm looking for a point-to-point wireless connection for PSTN or plain old telephone system. Any idea that doesn't involve VoIP? Thanks, JM." So the entire team put thought. Steve took a crack at this. Atypical took a crack at this. I took a crack at this. So here's the best we came up with for you. So the most direct answer to what you're looking for is a device that was actually made back in like the 90s, and I found it still around, and it's made by a company called Southern Bell, and it is the S6900, which is a wireless phone adapter. Now, basically what it's doing is it takes power from the power line, powers this little radio device, and then you plug your phone in, and then it effectively is using the AC line as a gigantic antenna. Now, they claim that you can send and receive data and faxes. They claim that you can work with modems. They claim that you can use it as a phone jack. There are, in fact, 35 reviews that cite 2.5 stars out of 5. So it's not really a great answer because the people that have it don't really like it. But it is an answer that meets your requirements, and we really struggled with that to find anything else that meets all of your requirements. The reality is, the reason they put what you're looking for in the end, the fundamental technology doesn't exist for that distance. There's two ways that you typically do voice. One is you're either wirelessly bridging the protocol underneath, so like IP, which you want it to stay away from. The second is you're actually carrying the voice. And the only reliable good way to do that is with DECT technology, or detect. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce an acronym, but those are the wireless forms that you get where really high quality voice transitions between the handset and the base, or some of the newer headsets do that with detect through the base. The slightly less good versions use Bluetooth, which is really a protocol designed to connect keyboard and mice, and then now you're cramming compressed audio through it, and it's not great. So you'll notice all the high-end are all using that detect technology. We found you a cordless made by a company called Ingenious. They make commercial stuff, electronics of sort, and they have the Freestyle 2. Now, I've seen this used in hotels, and we'll have a link for you both to the manufacturer's website as well as Newegg, where you can actually purchase the thing. It's a little pricey, but it is effectively a long-range cordless phone. Now, the advantage is here, it hits your requirement of, I think you'll be able to go 400 feet, and I think you'll be able to make and receive calls. Because it's using the 900 megahertz range, I don't think you're going to run into a lot of interference. It is $461, and that's a lot of money. So I guess beware of that. Now, if you're willing to come off the no VoIP solution, I have other options. And by the way, this is if you were a client and you came to me, this is what I would tell you to do. First of all, I would do the point-to-point IP link. So Ubiquiti nanobeams on each side, it is the most reliable way I've found to get the wireless equivalent of a wired connection of any kind. In fact, to the point that I had a very, what you would call, important client hires us to do a lot of work in his hotels, plural, and asked me to look into a situation at his home where he wanted to have better entertainment at his living room television, which was suffering because of poor Wi-Fi. And so we first tried putting an access point like right near the television, and it just wasn't cutting it to get the streaming content that he wanted. And so we took a wired connection and did a point-to-point link out to his TV, and it solved the problem for him. So my choice, anytime something is a must rely on, and voice typically hits that category, I'm doing a point-to-point IP link. Then once you have the link established, now it's as simple as setting up you could, if you wanted to go the complete SIP route, of course you could pay for a hosted 3CX instance, or you could host something yourself. If you wanted to keep it just dirt simple and you didn't want to deal with hosting all of the various things, Grandstream makes a device called the GXW4104. It's a gateway FXO FXS porting device. So essentially what that means is it brings phone lines in and sends them back out. Based on the item's description, I understand that you can connect, and I've not done this before. Okay, so we're venturing into uncharted territory a bit here. I understand that you can connect a SIP phone directly to this device. So what it would allow you to do is buy the GXP 1625, which is $35, buy the 4104, which is about $250, and you tie the IP phone to the 4104 and then just plug the phone line in from your house at the 4104 and have an IP link out to where the phone is. Now, the advantages there are your wireless link is a set and permanent thing. It's not a roaming handset that's trying to connect back to its base. You dial in the point-to-point connection. 400 feet is going to be a walk in the park for the nanobeams. You're going to have more than enough bandwidth to get a reliable phone call through. If you have a phone line on the other side and you put the Grandstream device there and plug the physical phone line in, my understanding is that you won't need a SIP hosting system because the gateway, the GXW4104, can host the system all on your own. And effectively what you've done is used IP to bridge voice from point A to point B. On point A, it's still a phone line. On point B, it's still what appears to you as a phone. It's just in between. There's some IP magic making all of it happen. So That's probably where I would start. Steve, anything to add to that? I know you're kind of going the opposite direction. You're more of a headset, and I look at my cell phone the 4 times a month that it is required to touch something on it, and then you go back to not touching it.
Yeah, no, I think that you covered this better than I could have, I think.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of May 12th, 2024, here's the Linux and open source news. The Dilo browser is back with version 3.1 after being quiet for almost a decade. RHEL 9.4 is available, and Alma and Rocky have announced their 9.4 releases. Fedora Asahi Remix 40 is also available. The Manjaro team has announced the release of Manjaro 24. The KDE project has announced the release of KDE Frameworks 6.2. The Linux 6.9 kernel has been released, and for those that prefer a fully Libre kernel, the Linux Libre team has released its version of the 6.9 kernel. Amazon has announced that they will be making their own Linux-based OS to replace Android on its devices. And lastly, in open source AI news, IBM has released several Granite AI models as open source. And the first Romanian LLM was announced today, a project led by Polytechnica Bucharest, the University of Bucharest, the Institute of Logic and Data Science, and the support of the BRD group, Société Générale.
Matt Hicks. He is the president and CEO of Red Hat, to guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Welcome in, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back. So Red Hat is a completely different company than it was maybe 10, 20, certainly even 30 years ago. As the company's grown and changed, how much of a challenge has it been becoming what it is today and staying on top of the evolving technologies and the evolving needs of your clients?
I think the most important thing for us has been, what did we not change in that progression? We were talking a little bit earlier of just the passion around open source communities and being able to foster them and knowing that's your core of innovation and staying true to that, even as we've moved from RHEL in the early days to middleware to containers now to AI. I've loved that continuity. I think that really has kept Red Hat special. It keeps us focused. So as we serve different customers, larger customers, new value points, that's been that thread that is always the same in Red Hat that I love. I love
Sure.
seeing that hold.
You know, Red Hat has uniquely positioned itself over time to deliver whatever the customer needs. And so if today it's containers, great. If tomorrow it's hybrid cloud, great. And now we're moving into this idea of AI. Do you see this as kind of a momentary thing, that this is just the latest thing that your customers are asking for? Or do you see this as kind of a watershed pivotal moment in the IT industry?
For me, it's funny. We watch technology trends and we really try to not chase fads. So part of the art in Red Hat is always finding there's a million things going on. What are the ones that will stick and be durable? For me, I've told a lot of people, the intuition wise on, is this in the fad or durable camp? This feels like Linux in the late 90s for me, of that level of impact where it is very early and raw, but there's so much community momentum and innovation that goes into it. The capabilities, this will change how we program, this will change how companies run, and it is very capable on it. So I have that same feeling of, I definitely am not in the fad camp. I think this will change and evolve incredibly fast, but I think it has that Linux-like potential to sort of change everything that we work and touch and interact with.
Can you talk to me where your mind was at back in the, as you put it, the 90s Linux? How did you view that? What were you doing at the time? And how did you approach the challenges of Linux back then?
So for me, back in the 90s, I was really enamored with computing. And so, I was going to computer engineering at school, and it was learn everything I can around how chips are built and all of these areas. And then in my side jobs, I was a Unix sysadmin for it. And I loved Unix. I loved the building blocks approach to it. When Linux came out, and it was really Linux and Intel at that time, it was the intersection of two passions. I love hardware, and I love the fact that I could build my own kernel and actually start to experiment with, how can I manipulate and light up hardware and do different things for me? And that I was hooked from the minute I built my first kernel with it. And then it became a source where I learned software largely from open source at the time, because it was just a great way to understand like how really, really good software was written. And so that for me, that was like my mid-90s story. And I see it today in the Instruct Lab group and this newer generation working in AI. It's that same passion and interest, and I'm going to put my own fingerprints on it and do really incredible things with it. Like same principles, just different technology on it these days.
So you saw the potential for what Linux could be and the potential power of it. And what excited you, if I'm understanding right, was the potential ownership where you could put your hands on the code and you could play with it, not inside of a lab, not inside of a company, but you, Matt, at home in your own time on your own hardware. There was a power that came with that.
There was. And even my first job was in consulting, actually at IBM. And so I spent a lot of time at customers deploying AIX at the time and deploying RHEL 2.1. Actually, that was my first Linux deployment. AIX was smooth, it was polished, but if it didn't work for you, you were stuck as a consultant. I was never stuck on Linux. And that empowerment of saying like it was not as polished as AIX at the time, but I could go down to the source code, like I could figure anything out. It was very empowering, and that started with me as like a developer mindset of play around with this, to a professional mindset as a consultant. And I think that core passion and empowerment is at the core of like what makes open source work. I think that's a common thread that you see in a lot of people that drives them.
So your background with consulting, I think, puts you in a unique position to understand the service aspect of what these companies do, right? At the end of the day, it's about serving customer needs. How would I phrase this? What kind of challenges do you come across where you lean back on that experience to say, I know what that company is going to expect, I know what they need, and now I'm in a position to do something about it?
It is, I was talking to the team just a couple weeks ago about, we know the technology is incredible, but how do you progress somebody through the trust where they're going to buy new hardware? It's like, believe me, they're not going to run this like one demo and then say, I'm going to buy a $500,000 machine. I'm like, the world doesn't work that way. We need that progression so that somebody can get something working, get confident with it themselves, get it working well enough that they can show what they're capable of to their boss. Maybe their boss can take it up the chain to the point that you say, well, now this is worth a really expensive bet in a piece of hardware. I go back to that intuition all the time. Like I've lived that. I worked in IT for several years. I spend a lot of time with sales now. I love the technology side, but that progression of how do you make the technology work for customers in the way that they need to build confidence and like get wins for them. That's probably where I spend the most of my advice and coaching these days, is making that connection from technology to technology that works for customers.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's easier for you to help people get to where they're going than it is to try to get them on board or wherever it is you're going. And so Red Hat must pivot then to kind of understand those needs and then serve them.
Yeah, this is why, instruction tuning and multi-phase training, all this is cool. But the problem it solves is I've seen customer after customer need to use small models but not be able to change them. And so starting at like, that is a known pain point. They want to be on premise. You see this in like OEM quarterly results. They're buying hardware. They know models are incredibly capable. They know what a trillion parameter model can do. How do you get a 7 billion parameter model to work for you? And I've spent a ton of time myself just as a techie of like trying to fine tune it myself to like build that intuition for like, is this really meaningful or not? But I think starting with, this is where customers are right now. Can we help them solve that problem? And then for us, as you saw at Summit, we always try to wrap an open source community around that. Like if I can solve it for customers, great. How do I pull the world into this solution too? And those are, I love that aspect of Red Hat. Like that's that thread that we always try to pull, like solve value, but then bring a lot of friends to the effort and challenge as well.
When it comes to Linux source code, open source code in general, it's fairly straightforward. The code's available, you download it, you have access to it, you modify it, you compile it, you can run it. With AI, it's a bit more challenging, right? Because you have the models, you have the raw data sets, you have the trained models, so there's all these various different components. How would you define open source AI?
It is a tough one right now. So I would actually say we're at the phase of, when you talk about open source, I usually start with what makes open source sustainable? What makes a community work? And it's the balance of usage and contribution. In the world of AI, it is new communities. It's multiple areas where we have to find that balance. For example, I don't believe there's going to be a community around pre-training because the costs of pre-training models are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So I'm like, we could open all this stuff up, but no, it would just be for intellectual interest. There really wouldn't be that gravity because it's prohibitively high. In that area, that's why we picked Apache as a license. Say, no one's going to be pre-training these things, but we want to allow usage to really have a usage community. But when you get into areas like instruction tunings, that is an academic community. Software engineers probably won't make instruction tuning work fundamentally better for reasoning. But a PhD student that is spent their entire academic profession on data science might be able to, just as a single individual, might be able to make those links. And so finding the challenge is how do we serve academics and make sure they have what they need under their terms? How do we make sure we, for us, it's pull the world in on contributing knowledge and skills to be able to feed the system that we're building? And then how do we arm, for us, it's developers on laptops with things within their reach, which is models, Apache licenses, small, and a lot of hardware support to do it. But it is I do like the simplicity of the Linux community. It's software developers on hardware and a couple of hardware vendors. AI is much more complex, but I think we have the maturity in open source to do that well and expand it. So it'll be fun, but I don't think the pure open source definition that worked for software necessarily parallels into this. You can open everything up, but if you don't get those contribution and usage communities built, it doesn't really matter. It's just open for open's sake at that point instead of a thriving innovation community.
When you look at some of the companies that are building the data sets, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, they have access to a tremendous amount of data, and that and a tremendous amount of computing power too, right? And that allows them to do things that just maybe aren't fundamentally possible for a lot of other companies. How does Red Hat stay competitive from the standpoint that you want to offer these products and services, but in some ways you're reliant on these models that are developed in data sets that are collected from other entities?
Yeah, I think, that was I won't debate the capability of these massive models. As models get bigger, they can just do more. It's like the zip file of the internet. The less lossy it gets, the more it can do. That said, for me, my moment when I used Mistral's 7B model and saw what it could do, a French startup, I've heard they have 1,000 NVIDIA GPUs to work with, and I think there were under 20 people. They created something that rivaled any of the trillion parameter models. That, I think, changed my impression of you don't need all the data in the world. You don't need all the computing. There are techniques you can put into play in smaller models with data that is fair use to be able to get. So that's where we're passionate about. Now, working with IBM Research, they do bring the compute infrastructure and a tremendous amount of knowledge. You think back to IBM, Watson won Jeopardy. They haven't stopped working on AI knowledge there. So they have brought a lot to the table, and I've loved that they have focused on the open access to that as well. What data they used, Apache licenses on that. That's really critical for us. But I would say our lane that we focus on is these things are trained on a lot of data. There are creators behind that data that own copyrights on it. And we live in the world of software where they put licenses that they choose attached to their copyrights. And as a user of that model, we believe you should adhere to what it was trained on. And if you're worried about GPL, don't use GPL recommendations, like use ASL or MIT. That's that link we're trying to develop where it's not just download all the data in the world, it's know where you got your data from. And these things can be incredibly capable. The Granite code model, 7 billion parameters, and I think outperformed every other open source code model out there. So I'm not too worried about needing the pools of data yourself, having 500,000 GPUs. I think there's a lot of technique to be able to build these smaller models and make them as capable as anything else.
So do I understand correctly that if, like, let's take a specific example. If I'm looking for a chatbot or a bot that will help me write Python, it isn't necessarily beneficial for it to understand C++. In fact, if anything, that convolutes the thing. And so maybe the future is in these very small, highly trained models.
Yeah, absolutely. Or I would say if you need a Python chatbot, you probably need it to know your code and your domain and your prompt, which might be private for you. So you being able to take something that just knows Python is great, train it, it's fantastic. If it knows how to write really creative haikus, like that doesn't help you. Like literally, that is just more cost in training and more inference cost to run. So we've shown putting the whole internet into one of these things, it's quite incredible of what it can do. But when the dust settles, I spend a lot more of my time in the help me polish language scripts, look at support cases, help me write a new program, but write like my program in my domain. And I don't need your haiku abilities. They're amazing, but I don't want to pay for those in my everyday runtime. So that's why we see that specialization. And then the ability to take something that's good at Python and make it great at your use case. That's where I think the potential is for the majority of companies and honestly open source community as well, just because that's how I use them. That's how I want to use them as well.
In the press Q&A yesterday, you talked about a project you were working on, and you said that in your home personal project, you use AI to generate some of these scripts. I'm curious, what does Matt Hicks spend his time? What are the geek projects you do at your home?
The people in the company know this. My geek project that I haven't gotten away from too much is I have a doorbell project, which for us, we live in the city, and the phone that buzzes and you have to buzz people in to drop off packages, you can't hear it from anywhere else in the house. And it's an old place. I live in Boston, so these places are hundreds of years old. It is impossible to do any electrical work connect to that phone. So what was my natural inclination was I'm going to write an AI system that can listen for that ring, but understand the difference between the ring and my kids screaming or doors slamming or whatever goes on. And when that ring happens, play it over Sonos speakers in the rest of the house so we hear it. And I have been through convolutional neural networks and machine learning and had this functioning box sitting there. And now, what can I reproduce with Gen AI models like as a faster starting point, even though they're more bloated? So I spend a ton of time just trying to make something very real that you use and work with every day. And you have to bring it to my production, which is in the closet with a microphone that sits there and listens to 1 second audio samples in the house. But that's one of my fun projects that I love applying technology to because it's very real to me. It makes me solve all those like last mile.
Yeah, you're scratching a real itch. What is your daily driver distro? When you sit down to reload a machine or you buy a laptop, what do you load it with?
I'm actually working on this right now, Fedora 40. When I told Pat, it was true. I bought it was a Dell Precision, I think 5490 Intel Core Ultra 9. I'm currently going through the challenge of trying to make the camera work on it. And I was worried, it's like, I used to be a package maintainer for Fedora, and I've gotten very rusty on this, but I think I got through NVIDIA drivers last night. Camera, I thought I had cracked this morning, but I should have it done by the end of the day. But that is the distro I love. It's the one I learned on. It's where all my muscle memory lies, and it'll probably be staying with for a while.
Matt Hicks, he is the president and CEO of Red Hat and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Matt, we appreciate the time. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Thank you very much.
A few days ago, an Ubuntu user noted that the browser integration feature for KeePass XC had vanished, rendering the corresponding browser extension non-functional. A follow-up check by a member of the KeyPass XC team revealed that the Debian developer had removed some functionality from the application. When he requested that the original functionality be restored, he was told the following. This is from Julian Claude, a Debian developer and Ubuntu core developer. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. It was a mistake to ship with all the plugins built by default. This will be painful for a year as users annoyingly do not read the news files as they should be reading, but there's little that can be done about that. It is our responsibility to our users to provide them with the most secure option possible by default. All of these features are superfluous and don't really belong in a local password database manager. These developments are utterly misguided. Users who need this crap can install the crappy version, but obviously this increases the risk of drive-by contributor attacks. So the developer is understandably upset. The developer is pushing people to go towards the Flatpak, which is an interesting choice because that's how I'm choosing to solve a lot of my problems lately. So, Steve, I want to start here. If you have a group of users, you're talking to end users, people that just want to use the software. Not that I necessarily think this should be the kind of thing up for the debate of opinions between maintainers and developers and core developers. However, is the ability to fill in browser extensions, that is to say, to use your passwords that are stored in KeyPass XC to log into websites, does that sound like an important function of a password manager to you?
I mean, I think that it's a really difficult situation from the standpoint of, like, you've got a distro maintainer and we implicitly trust them to make the right decisions for us and the software because, we don't want to go through the process of curating it ourselves or some variation therein. Mm-hmm. So I have some sympathy from the fact that we're asking the core developers to do a thing that is kind of thankless and largely goes unnoticed. So I have some sympathy there. On the other hand, completely breaking the functionality of the software that you are attempting to safeguard, I think is the term that I'll use, also does a little bit of a disservice. And so it's a tough one. So
I guess here's the thing. Let's just say, for the sake of arguments, I would say that the ability to fill in passwords on a web page is a must for a password manager in 2024. Where are you entering these passwords if not into a web browser? The vast majority of things is now done through a web UI. So let's just park that there for a second. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that I didn't think that it was a necessary functionality to be able to enter passwords into a web browser, that integration is just an additional thing that most people don't use. Now, first of all, I might ask, who's in a better position to understand that? A core Debian developer or the person who is the maintainer for the KeyPass XC project? Again, a questions I'll park over to the side for just a moment. So if I'm the Debian developer, I'm responsible for the end package, and I'm told this package, first of all, it's not a plugin, okay? It's a functionality of the software. So really, when they say that it shouldn't have been built with these plugins, what they mean to say is it shouldn't have been built with all of these feature flags. We should have implicitly disallowed certain features when we built. Okay, so we're going to do that to reduce the attack surface. I can understand the argument, but at the end of the day, if you believe that it's going to reduce the attack surface, but by doing so fundamentally causes breakage for the users of said software, wouldn't it make far more sense to go back to the package maintainer and say, hey man, the software that you're developing, we've got some security concerns. It would probably be kind of nice if along with that was, and here's the research we did, here's the problem in the wild, here's the bug where somebody got bit by, but I don't see any of that. I just see an arbitrary assertion of it might be insecure, and so if we reduce these features out of your program, then the program will have less of an attack surface. If there's less of an attack surface, it's a more secure product for the end user. the question that doesn't seem to be asking here, or I guess really it's asked and then the answer is presumed here, is so does the user want a more secure minimal product, or does the user want a more featureful product? And if the GitHub issues request for KeePass XC is to be believed, more users are upset about the fact that they're no longer going to be able to have this very, from their perspective, needed feature. And, well, no users that I can find so far are concerned with the security model of KeePass XC and its ability to interface with a web browser extension. Now, add to that, both the maintainer and other people on the internet have suggested, well, why not just have, if the concern is reducing the attack surface, why not have KeePass XC dash minimal or dash light or dash basic or something, and leave the normal KeePass XC package to be that of the package maintainer and that who the developer thinks it should be. And if you want to make a different product altogether with this decreased attack surface, fine, but call that thing something else. Because I think from the developer standpoint, when Joe Blow, the user, sits down and installs KeePass XC, he expects all of the features in KeePass XC, not the least of which to be the bulleted feature on their website, to be included in the package. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me, Steve. Am I missing something?
No, I don't think it is. At some point, you have to allow the users to make their mistake, right? And if their mistake is, I am choosing a password manager that gives me a level of convenience over a level of security, that it should be their choice to make.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the developer's response. So his response is interesting. He goes, quote, "No, this wasn't communicated to us beforehand, nor was there a chance to collaborate on an effective solution for both parties. All I can say is use Flatpak and get away from distro lock altogether." So this is funny to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's the obvious comedic value of Debian is supposed to be stable, right? That's why people choose Debian. And JT and I have batted this around till we've been blue in the face, both of us. This idea of what does that really mean? Does stable mean you get access to the latest fixes, or does stable mean it doesn't change? Because doesn't change doesn't always necessarily mean stable, right? Doesn't change can be, and so problems that exist now exist for a long time. So depending on how you use those terms or what your semantics are, that kind of that can kind of morph a little bit, right? If the goal of a Debian user, or the average expectation of the Debian user, is to be that we keep everything here and we keep things stable and we roll the boat slowly so that you know what to expect, it doesn't seem like this is in line with that, right? Because we've made a massive change. We've made a massive change rather quickly. We've made a massive change rather quickly that has a huge impact to a bunch of users. We've made a massive change rather quickly that has a huge impact to a lot of users without any real recourse for the developer. So he's saying, effectively, forget that entire process. I'm done with it. Forget trying to pull it and have it included in the Debian repository. Just go pull the Flatpak for KeePass XC. Now, that's interesting for me for two reasons. One is, seems like he's kind of throwing in the towel, although I don't know exactly what his secondary recourse is. But here's the other thing that is interesting to me, Steve. You and I have said for the better part of a year now, the way to run a Linux distro might be you install your superfluid base, and then on top of that, you run Flatpaks, because at the end of the day, the reality is what the expectation of the users are. They open the application, they want the application to show up on their computer monitor and be able to interact with it. If Flatpak is the most direct way for a software developer to write code and deliver that experience to the user, maybe that's just the way they should go.
Yeah, it's a tough call, right? Because as I said, I have a lot of trust in the package maintainers to begin with, and a lot of them have a long history of dealing with that. So on one hand, you've got the developer that's trying to provide a direct experience to the user, and on the other hand, you've got a package maintainer who, I suppose maybe it's a little far-fetched to say this, but they have a moral obligation given the fact that they have chosen this path in order to protect their users. And so it's hard for me to come down on the idea that, well, you know what, this guy, maybe he could have been a little softer on his approach, but he's doing the job that he was asked to do. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we've got the Flatpaks where the distro can kind of wipe their hands of the actual individual application, and the developer gets to deliver the application as it was intended.
Yes, which in my mind should be the default model unless there's a reason to do otherwise, right? Like I don't quite understand. I mean, I do understand. I get it, right? It's the whole idea of if you were stuck on an island and you were given a copy of Debian and a copy of the Debian archives, what could you get to or what could you make work? And then there's a whole bunch of philosophical rules that get us there. And that handles everything from licensing to what's included, what's not included, defaults, all the things. So I get it. I'm just, this entire situation seems disappointing to me. Now, the bright side is that this only affects 24.10 and up. So this didn't get thrown in before 24.04. So we're good for the next LTS for sure. But this is going to start biting people down the road. And when it does, I imagine there's going to be some not very happy people. And so hopefully KeePass will be able to stem the problems from the standpoint that they'll get flat packs out. I look at this as just another reason. So the latest example for me was Remina. So I use Remina still as an RDP client. I really like it. I know about the lack of ongoing contributions to the RDP module, but it works really well for me for the moment. And so I've been using it. And in Arch most recently, when I pull down Remina from the AUR, for whatever reason, when I try to make a connection with RDP, the entire application crashes. It does not do that with the Flatpak. That follows hot on the heels of AvidMux, or excuse me, not AvidMux, Kdenlive, which again tried to install from the AUR and had a problem with it and installed the Flatpak and it worked just fine. And the more times that happens, as what's really happening underneath the hood is I remove it out of the Pacman module and I add it to my Flatpak module, and then the next time the playbook runs, it moves from pulling it from the AUR or from Pacman directly from FlatHub. And I have to say, it's been a fairly net positive experience. Every time I do that, something else. The only downside I have, really the only complaint I have, theming. Theming, I don't know why we can't find a way to do this, but theming can't, for whatever reason, when it's a Flatpak, it isn't capable of coring the system to say, oh, every other window on the system is dark. I should prefer the dark theme as well. Now, the flip side to that is at least app developers are getting hip to that function, and so inside of preferences and inside of options, there are typically ways to make the applications dark mode, but then you're doing it on every application one by one instead of doing it in a global place. So that's a little frustrating. But
well, part of that comes back to the sandboxing, right? Do you really want this application to be able to read your system-wide settings? Like the whole purpose of Flatpak and snaps are to provide you a safe way to run the applications.
Well, I feel like I at least would like the ability to expose. Okay, let me reframe it. We should build the system such that the system can specify dark mode or light mode and have that preference available to containerized applications. I get where you're coming from. Yeah, you're probably right. I don't know that I necessarily want every app I install as a Flatpak to be able to see everything in my system, particularly the system settings. But that one particular boolean, could we have a thing that's like dark or light, and then, hey, I deliver the application the way you ask? I think that's probably something we should do just from a usability standpoint. But again, if you're like me, I don't really mind going in there and configuring literally the most challenging one I've done is Kate, because you got to change it in like two different places, the window color, and then there's also like the built-in whatever color themes. And so I don't know, it seems like there's an extra step involved, but maybe I'm getting something in the way of security for it, so I should just count my blessings. But I feel like that's one of those usability things that you wouldn't see in other operating systems, and so the user just sees it as weird. Like, I don't know, I open this application and this one looks different from the other ones.
Yep. I mean, it goes back to the old argument about, well, such and such a thing doesn't work with Linux. Well, it actually would work with Linux, but they didn't write the drivers. Like, that's the same old argument we're touting out here, right? Is the theming should work, but, well, the theming does work. It can't read the spot where it gets the theming information from.
Right. So anyway, we'll continue to watch the situation. Obviously, if you're a person that heavily relies on KeePassXC and the web interface web plugin, you're going to want to be aware of this. It doesn't mean that you can't use it. It just means that you'll have to compile it with the appropriate feature flags. I think that they're eventually going to do something in the way of you'll be able to do KeyPass XC full, or they might just have you download it via Flatpak. But either way, I wish it had played out slightly differently because it doesn't really leave a great taste in my mouth. However, I'm glad to see that we still have a decent option for a local offline password database manager. Endless OS 6 is here. The Endless OS Foundation announced the release of general availability of Endless OS 6, the latest version of the Debian-based app-centric operating system for everyday use. Based on Debian GNU Linux 12 Bookworm, the operating system series Endless OS 6 is more than a year after Endless OS 5, featuring a refined look across all of the core apps to include GNOME 43, the desktop environment series, which brings a new dark style preferences, improved screenshots, screen recording, as well as updated apps. Under the hood, Endless OS 6 is powered by Linux kernel 6.5 and ships with Pipewire 1.0 for improved audio handling. This release also promises to handle low memory situations better than previous releases for older hardware. Now, Steve, one of the things that happened since in between Endless OS 5 and Endless OS 6 is one of my kids, two of my kids are doing great with technology. One of them is kind of fallen off the bandwagon from the standpoint that we're not getting the bedtime thing, right? And it's turning into, I walk into the room and we're an hour past bedtime and we're still on an electronic, which tells me that we're not responsibly handling the electronic. So I tried an in-between step of you can be on the electronic, but just no internet. Go find something creative to do, and that I was thinking would be less threatening and less appealing and less tempting, and then we'll go to sleep. What I found out was we don't have the self-control to stay off the internet. So now we've lost the internet entirely, Steve. We've gone back to the Stone Ages, I'm sure, from their perspective. And so I took the laptop and I said, listen, here's what we're going to do. You are going to wipe it. You're going to load Endless on it, and then you cannot connect it to the internet. You'll have to use it just as is. So I'll give you a shot on the internet. You can load it up with whatever you want. So we got Krita on there. We got the little animal thing so you can go and research and the entire thing of Wikipedia and a number of different other exploratory and games and this, that, and the other. But now that kid is just out on, Rikers Island with no connection to the world. And we're struggling a little bit, I think, to kind of do it. But Endless OS has options. There are things there for you to do, even if you don't have access to an internet connection. I think that's a super valuable skill to learn in life. Have you played with Endless OS 6? Do you have any plans to?
I haven't played with 6 yet. We have a wide variety. I think we've got 4 and 5 installed based on the time that which the computer was installed, and they're still receiving updates. I absolutely will take a look at 6 eventually, but the thing just does its job and gets out of the way. And so honestly, I had completely forgotten about the idea of trying to do an upgrade because, like I said, it just seems to do its job. And what more do I need it to do?
It's kind of like, so your flat hub machine is running just fine, so you don't need an update to your flat hub machine to use a newer version of the operating system for your flat hub machine.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's kind of one way to look at it. So I don't know if you haven't played with Endless OS, highly recommend you do so. I tried to introduce it at the shop, and I thought I'll take it to the Altispeed boys, have them tear it apart, and it worked. I got feedback, strong, very opinionated feedback on things we like, things we don't like. And what I'm learning is that Endless OS is highly crafted, highly opinionated, highly designed with one very specific workflow or one very specific use in mind. And if you deviate from that, you're kind of swimming upstream a bit. It's not meant to be customizable. It's meant to be an easy on-ramp for users onto technology. And so I'm still trying to decide exactly where that fits and how that fits. The other thing that I'm keeping my eye on, Steve, have you been paying attention to what System 76 is doing with Pop! OS?
I have been catching some of the interviews and stuff like that have been floating around the web in terms of how they're doing Pop! OS and some of the stuff they're working on. But why don't you just take me there instead of leading me? Yeah,
fair enough. The thing that I think Pop! OS is doing that I don't think a lot of other distros are really in a position to do, because System 76 is selling computers, they're doing surveys to their customers to find out what they like and what they don't like. And so when you're surveying an operating system user, you're surveying somebody who went out to the internet, downloaded an operating system, installed it on a computer, and now they're telling you what they like. So if they're there because they're there by choice, right? If they didn't like that particular flavor of Linux, they would have downloaded a different one or a different desktop environment or whatever else. System 76 is uniquely positioned because they're shipping a computer to, a college that's doing scientific research. And so that college student sits in front of it after they get done off of their Mac or their Windows PC, and now their feedback is based off of just, what is my expectation of this computer? And so Carl has gotten everything from, this is a great thing that works perfectly every time for me, and it's so simple, to, I don't know how anybody could use this Linux thing, it's very confusing. And what they've done is they've taken all of that feedback, they've categorized it out, they figured out where they need to improve, and that is the result of the redesigned Pop! OS. So it has things like the ability to tile. I've been saying for months now, I've gotten sucked into this tiling window manager. In fact, after 2404, I tried to go back to Kubuntu, and I ran Kubuntu I made it 72 hours through Red Hat Summit, trying to run Kubuntu, and then I ended up blowing my laptop away and going back to i3, in part because it is just too plain simple to say, I want these applications spread out over these pixels, and then I want to interact with them. And I really like that functionality, and it's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that it takes significantly more to get it all set up under KDE or GNOME. Well, Pop! OS is kind of splitting that difference because they're rewriting the entire desktop environment, and I think it's Rust, and they're turning tiling into just a one-click option. So you click a button and all of a sudden all your windows tile. You click another button and now tiling's off. You can drag things around. So it very elegantly splits between a tiling window manager and the rest of the desktop environments. Additionally, because they're rewriting everything from the ground up, their experience is tied to what they're hearing from their feedback from their users, rather than some sort of, hey, we're going on a technical vision and come along for the ride sort of a thing. So I'm watching that very closely because I think it might potentially align with what I'm trying to get out of a computer. I want an operating system. I want the operating system to stay out of my way. And lately, I want an operating system and I want it to stay out of my way, and I want it to tile the windows because I think it's more efficient.
So let me ask you, do you use this in a multi-monitor environment?
All the time. In fact, one of my favorite things is when I have 5 monitors and I can't remember what desktop is on what monitor, I can hit mod key T and type the name of the application, and it pulls me right into that application on whatever monitor I last had it on.
Interesting. I might have to give this a try. I might fire it up on my laptop just because I don't know. I'm loath to tinker with my desktop like that, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I have to tell you, and this rubbed off from you. If you're on Arch, adding another desktop environment doesn't really break anything. I mean, you can always go back to whatever you were on. It just gives you one more way to access the stuff that's already on the PC, which is kind of a nice bridge from point A to point B without messing with what you already have going on. So I started with KDE on Arch and then slowly made my way into i3 as I got more and more comfortable. And now I can't dig myself out, Steve. I'm just kind of stuck here.
I mean, you make it sound like a compelling use case, especially because I use the quasi tiling features from GNOME. Like I use the super key arrows to slide things over to specific spots. And
yes.
I definitely have my far left monitor has my chat stuff and my right monitor has other specific stuff. So I get it.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. All that. So, I mean, and then as you get into it, you start dialing things in. So I start saying, okay, these applications are going to open on this workspace or this monitor. And then I don't even have to see them. If that isn't the active thing, I still know that application is right. Anyway, it's a black hole and I got sucked in and I can't get out. System 76, I'm continuing to watch them. I think they're doing that well. Music and Mayors means we're out of time. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com.